Hello, everyone, and welcome to the inaugural program of Auer Time with Crown College coach John Auer. Auer Time is a weekly program that gives you, the fans, the opportunity to ask the Crown College coach questions about the Storm, football or sports in general, or to just seek the coach's wisdom about life events that are going on out there. If you find that you'd like to ask your own questions of the coach, please send them to us at johnauer@minorleaguesportsupport.com. That's John Auer at minorleaguesportsupport.com. Please have your questions to us by Wednesday at noon. We record the program at about noon on Thursday, and we just want to give the coach a day to review those questions before we record the show. This week, we open up the program for the very first time and introduce a little bit about what the coach has going on or his vision for what's going to happen for this particular season. Plus, we're going to talk about last week's game against Martin Luther and the big game against St. Scholastica this weekend. So let's get right to Auer Time. All right, so we want to welcome Coach Auer to our inaugural show here. So, Coach, let's first of all begin. Do you have any injury updates or team moves that you want to mention with us?
A guy that was injured yesterday actually at practice, Taylor Watkins, who's a backup quarterback, hurt his knee in some of our conditioning drills. Hasn't played yet, but still a concern for us because we were going to start putting him on some kickoff and some different things like that to give him a chance. But other than that, we still have the two guys with the hands, and they'll still have to wear clubs, and we're trying to figure it out some way so they don't have to keep changing out the cast because they keep sweating and it hurts their incision where they have the pins in and things like that. So trying to figure those out. We have a couple guys with shoulders and things like that, and so this week in practice we've tried to curtail some of those guys' reps. But other than that, we're doing pretty good and pretty healthy from that. Like I talked about, Jacob Pardee is out for the year, tore his ACL. He was a senior. He's going to take a medical red shirt, so he'll be back again next year, which is a positive for that. But yet this year now we're trying to figure out what we do offensively because he was a major part of our two-back attack and played some tight end too as well. So we're trying to transition from that with knowing, trying to keep that positive in place of him being able to come back next year.
Is this one of those points in the season where you're never really going to be healthy until December?
That's the truth. And you try to do things in practice to try to keep away from that. But like I said yesterday, he got, the one young man got hurt while we're doing conditioning. He was just cutting. So sometimes you're never going to have that. But you try to limit it as much as possible. You try to get them into, the trainer and try to do that, and whether it's ice baths or just icing in general. Until we get done with the year, until we get a couple weeks in there, pretty much all of them have some type of nick and some type of sprain here and there that you just have to work through and try to make the best of it.
Excellent. Looking at last week's game that you had against Martin Luther, were there some things that you take away from that you were really pleased with what you saw?
Yeah. I would say our ability offensively, we went into the game saying, hey, we could probably run the ball 40, 50 times against them, but we want to make sure that we're working on our passing game too, because when we play a team like we play Scholastica this week, we're going to have to mix it up. And you saw it the first 2 weeks of what we're doing. And so we went into it with the mindset of, hey, let's make sure we work on the passing game too as well. And I think that was probably the best thing offensively, was that idea of, we wanted to have two guys that rushed over 100 yards, which we had. And then we wanted to get to 200 yards passing, and I think we were at 160 something in there from that. So it didn't quite get to where we wanted to be at. So that was a positive. And I would say just our general. And we got in the second half where we fumbled the one time, which wasn't great from that because I kept them in the game for that time, and we were trying to get some twos in there just to see what they could do. But I like the way that we drove the ball down at the end, converted 2 fourth down plays. So to put the game out of reach in the end. So I like that. And I thought defensively, we had some good moments too as well. The goal line stop right before halftime was a huge part of the game. And then there was another fourth down stop that we had too as well. And so for us, I think sometimes you take away from that, it's 43-33. Well, your offense won it. Well, there was times where our defense did a pretty good job and they held up their end too as well.
You had 2 offensive plays to start out the game and 2 touchdowns right off. That's the way you scheme it up, isn't it?
Yeah, we'd like to keep going, 6 or 7 of those. But yeah, that's it. You couldn't ask for anything better to start off. What it did though was, we got ahead. Now what they do offensively changed. So what we worked on all week offensively was the option stuff. And for us, all of a sudden they just started throwing the football around and that type of thing from it. It changed up what we had done. And so it took us a little while to adjust to that fact and adjust to how they changed their game plan.
Brandon McCormick, from week 1 to week 3, shows a dramatic improvement, really looks comfortable in the offense. What are some things that you're seeing in his game?
I would say the biggest thing is just he's better. What we found is, when we include him in with the running game and get him involved and get him active with it, he's very competitive. And I think the more that you can take where he's just out there playing and he's making those decisions as far as what checks to make and those type of things and running the show, I think he's better because of that. And so we've seen that in him. We've seen that improvement in him as far as his decision making, not only on passes, but also on, hey, what run play are we checking to from this to this, because of his competitiveness and because of getting him more involved with what we're doing.
I'm curious from a momentum standpoint for him in particular is, he was telling me, because he was hurt last season early on and where he had transferred from, that he actually hadn't won a game in like 16 starts or something. Do you look at that as from a player mentality standpoint, is when you break that threshold, it's sort of things work better for you, things slow down and you're able to get things going for yourself?
I think that's what it is for him too, as well, is that idea of, I think there he had to do about everything. And I think what he's realizing here is, I have resources here. I have different guys that can make plays. I have 2 running backs. I have some good receivers. I have a good old line in front of me that can block. And so I can facilitate those things, as opposed to there, I think he had to do just about everything to make things happen. And I think he's starting to realize that. And what was interesting from us is 2 years ago when he was first here in the spring, we went on a missions trip and he was the quarterback then, and he had never played for us previously. And one thing we found in there was that, like I said, he's a really competitive person, that if you put him in that position where he even getting hit a little bit, I think is good for him from that standpoint, because it kind of brings his play up a little bit when that happens. We're hoping it's in the run game and not in protection that's happening. But you see that inside of him. The more he gets into the game, the more competitive he is and the better production he has.
One of the things that I've noticed is that his play has improved as the receiving core has also really come about. So are you seeing that the receivers are going to take on a bigger role with your offense as the season's going along?
Yeah, I would say as we go into it, it's going to be, again, we talk about this, we want to be balanced, and so whether that's the shots to go deep, or whether that's some wide receiver screens, or whether it's, bubble screen, those type of things where we're getting them the ball early and then letting them make plays, or it's something that, they have to get open and he's hitting them later on. Those are all the types of things that I think all of our receivers are good at, and each one brings a different thing. Some are more possession type guys, some are better at going deep, some are really good at blocking and that type of thing. So each one brings a different thing, and as you go through the season, teams start to see, hey, they're using this guy for this guy for this. So the more that they can do the other things well, the better we'll be offensively, because we'll be multifaceted in what each of our receivers can do as well.
You're facing St. Scholastica this weekend, probably the best team in the conference. So how do you prepare for a team like that?
Well, I would say it is. I mean, they've been to the playoffs the last 3 years and have the most talent across the board. And again, whether it's, I spend most of my time on offense, and because I coach the offensive line too as well. And it's what we talk. We have to be able to spread them vertically, horizontally in our run game, and the same thing in our passing game. We cannot just focus on one thing, because in that, that's where you can just beat people up. And I think against Martin Luther, we were pretty good up front, where across the board, we could move people to where we wanted to move it. In this case, you're not going to get that. We're going to have to fight and scratch for every yard. And so therefore, we're going to have to spread them, across the field, and then also vertically in what we do, from the standpoint of trying to mix it up and trying to get them off balance. Defensively, I think the biggest thing for us is, one, we got to improve our pass rush. I think we've been decent in our pass rush, but we've got to, they throw the ball pretty well. Scholastica does, and so we've got to improve our pass rush from that standpoint with just bringing 4. We can't just say, hey, we need to bring pressure and bring 6, and therefore play more man coverage. We've got to be able to bring 4, play some zone coverage behind it, and keep everything in front of us. And so, it does. It presents a different challenge from that standpoint of doing it. You have to play error-free football too as well. We can't be turning the ball over. We can't be penalties, putting ourselves behind the change. We've got to play an error-free football game. But what's nice in our conference now is, you take a look at it, there's some pretty good parity in there. And there's some teams that, part of it is the teams that were even below us seem like they're playing better now And then the top teams, it's not that they're not playing as well, but it seems like those teams are getting closer to the top teams, which bodes well for us in the weeks ahead and what we look at and say, hey, we have a chance every week we line up against each team we play.
It's gotten to the point, I would assume, where you're not saying everything has to be perfect for us to win. You look at it now and just say, if we just get 1 or 2 breaks, we're going to win this game.
Yeah, and that's a great point. It's a good way of saying it. We're going to need those breaks, and we're going to need those big plays and those type of things. But again, if you stay away from the errors, that allows those things to be magnified as far as the impact that those 2 or 3 plays can make. And so, that's what we're talking about, trying to be as solid and efficient and effective as we can be in both offensively and defensively and special teams too as well. So that way when those times come, we have the opportunities for those plays to make a bigger impact.
They have quite a good, solid defensive group against a pass. So what are some keys that you try to do to offset that or augment yourself?
I would say first off, we have to be able to protect up front. So a lot of times they'll bring 3 and drop 8 off. And so if a team's going to do that against you, you've got to be able to give your quarterback time enough to find that spot in the seam, let that receiver find that void in the zone to be able to do that. And so that's a big thing for us. And then, like I talked about earlier, just that concept of spreading them horizontally and vertically to be able to find those openings inside of it and try to do some different things play action wise and some different things like that in order to put them in a bind where they can't just sit back and read everything in front of them. We want to be able to run the football, play action off of it. That way, they're having to make multiple decisions on each play as opposed to being able to sit back and just watch what we do.
Their quarterback, Dakota Paulson, averaging a little more than 13 yards per completion. So looking for the big play most of the time. How do you try to limit that?
Well, we talked about this week, that concept of keeping everything in front of you. And we've got Coach Taylor does a good job of changing up coverages and doing those types of things. So that way you don't give up the big play, and you have that where, our corners and safeties in different roles to different coverages, have to stay behind the receivers, and talked about the fact of, hey, this is where they'd like to look from that standpoint on their shots to go deep. And they'll do that. They'll take a shot. Usually every 4 or 5 plays, they'll take a shot deep. And so part of it is, you take a look at film, they've had people with them, they just go out and make plays. And so, I see us being in that same position today there. We just have to go out and make the play when we're in that position.
Looking at the season as a whole, when you enter into a season, do you set goals for what you're looking for your team to accomplish?
Yeah, I think you set goals with your guys individually and what they can do. I think you set goals as an offense and a defense, and then as a team. And I think part of that is they have to be, I also teach sport management classes. We talk about them being mildly difficult but attainable from that standpoint. And we talked about, hey, being in the hunt at the end for the conference, being able to be over 500 in our record, which puts us in that position. And so from our standpoint, those are the goals that we have coming into it. And also, too, getting better as the season goes along. Improving in each facet of the game. So that way, by the end of the year, we want to be to the point where nobody wants to play us at the end of the year because of how we've improved through the time.
I'm kind of curious because I hear, in every aspect of life, somebody will say something like, well, I want to be better at this. Is there a quantitative number do you say we want our run game to be better? So is that you're giving up 5 less yards a week? How do you try to measure that?
I think we do. We implemented helmet stickers for this year, and we have 3 goals on offense and defense for each week that we look at and say, if we meet these needs, we meet these goals, we have a pretty good chance of winning. And so those are all quantitative. Those are, otherwise if you leave it subjective, for some people, hey, we blocked well this week. Well, some might say we were horrendous blocking, and another person might say we're great blocking this week. So we try to equate that to, like we did last week. We said, hey, we want each running back to have over 100 yards, and we want to throw the ball over 200 yards. The more things you have like that quantitatively that you can look at. So defensively, you take a look at points and you take a look at total yardage. Where are you going to stay? We're going to keep them below points. We're going to keep them below total yardage. And the hard part about that is, some weeks we have it for each week, but some weeks it's going to change according to your opponent. Offensively, you might look at it and say, hey, we need to score 30 points this week in order for us to have a chance to have success in the end. Other weeks, you might look at it and say, hey, we got to put up 50 this week to have a chance from that. And the same thing defensively. And so, yeah, we try to keep it as quantitative as possible. We do, have conversations about efforts and things like that with them, but that's not necessarily something, that's more of an individual conversation, a part of film that we put on film, but it's not necessarily part of the goals and objectives we have. Those are more objective and more quantitative in terms.
When the season was just about to start, did you have kind of a feel of what you thought you measured up here in the conference itself?
Yeah, as we started off, obviously the two defensive players that we lost, the two good defensive linemen, that was okay. Hey, how are we going to overcome those two things? We knew we were going to be better in the secondary because we returned all four of those guys. We lost one corner since then. Linebacker, even though one is new, we thought we'd improve from that area, and we thought, okay, hey, we're going to be pretty young on the defensive line, but that would improve as the season went along. And so, yeah, that comes into it. And then offensively, we returned 8 of 11 starters coming back, added another receiver too as well that used to start for us. So we took a look at it coming back, but as we improve, you also take a look around the conference and say, okay, they've improved too. Not only the top teams from that, but even more so some of those teams that were below us, they've improved too as well. And so, just like as we've improved our field and our facilities and our weight room and things like that, if we have our team now and our facilities now and things like that 5 years ago, okay, we're going to be at the top of our conference. But you take a look around and other people in our conference are doing the same thing we are.
You're taking young men and trying to turn them into mature men as they're heading out the door. How do you try to instill, or what values are you trying to instill in them, not only as men, but as Christian men?
Sure. I'd say the first thing we do is we try to develop a relationship with each kid. Try to understand who they are, try to understand why they think a certain way, why, what background do they have family-wise and those type of things. And I think once you develop that relationship, I think that helps us with guiding and directing them. And I tell our guys all the time, I don't want to have a ton of rules that we can't do this and can't do this or do that. I want you to think in terms of a man of faith. Would God, my family, my teammates, my coaches, my friends, would they be proud of what I'm going to do? And if it's yes, do it. If not, don't do it. And so we're trying to get them so when they leave this place, they understand more so how to think on their own, how to do things on their own, and whether that's academics or whether it's just in life, we're trying to get them and mold them and have them, because otherwise I can't tell them, hey, you need to think like this, or you need to act like this, or you need to get this job, or you need to do that. Ultimately, they have to be the one that decide to buy into what Crown's about. And Crown's about that. Crown's about growing in your faith. Crown's about the that aspect of more than just football, about the different aspects of your life. And again, in recruiting, I tell them, hey, don't come here if you just want to play football. But if you want to grow as a man, if you want to get better as a man, then this is a good place for you to come through. And so, when they buy into that, when they buy into that concept, usually it's amazing to see what happens to their lives and to see the growth and development that happens towards anything, towards their academics, towards just how they walk around campus and do that. And so, ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to develop a relationship, trying to get them to buy into who we are and what Crown's about. And then once that happens, anything can happen from that standpoint as far as their future and their development.
You and I had talked earlier in the season about how players had changed in attitudes from when you first started coaching to now, primarily in that they're looking more for an explanation, an understanding of the decisions and the things you're asking them to do. What are some benefits that you see out of kind of that new change in attitude?
We always talk about if you're a 2 or a 3, you have a desire to be a 1. And so, it's tough. We have to stay away from the idea of, what's he complaining about, or what's this or what's that. I think we want all of our kids to have that desire and to have that want inside of them to say, hey, I could be out there making those plays. I could be out there doing, better than, such and such, or making this play happen or making that. And I think that's part of the positives that come from it, is that mindset of I want a chance. I want to be able to do those things. Along with that is, again, our communication with them has to be, okay, these are the reasons why. I have more kids come up to me now and say, hey, what do I need to work on to get out there? What do I need to improve on in order to be out in the field more and do those things? And so I think that's more, I think back to when I was in college, we didn't have a whole lot of that interaction outside of practice and those type of things to it. And so I think more kids are coming to us asking for those things, as opposed to, back then you just went out there and played and you worked to get better, and whatever happened from that. And so I think it's generating more conversations about things. With a lot of it, it's positive. With some of it, you have to work through some problems because of that.
When you and your coaches go out to recruit players, what are some of the things that you try to say about this is why you want to be at Crown College?
I'd say the main thing is the faith component, and growing in your faith, which can impact you for the next 40 years of your life. And think about the fact of, you devote 4 years towards that growth and development. Your time with your family, your time on your job, your time, overseeing different people will be that much better because of this investment that you put in over the next 4 years. And try to include in with that professors, faculty and staff here as well, coaches that can guide them through those 4 years, which will ultimately make that time better. Because a lot of times when you're in high school, you're 18, I just want to go play somewhere and play football, or I just want to go do this, or and you're not thinking through what happens after you're done. And so in our terms of recruiting, we try to talk to them about what types of things we can do that'll make them better once they leave Crown, and what happens during their time they're here. And that includes, obviously for us, you've got chapel time, and you've got different, small group time, and you've got time in your classes, and you've got time with your teammates and things like that. We go through all those things, all the different aspects that you get at Crown outside of just football or outside of just classroom things that enhance each of those areas.
We have 2 fan questions this week, which I was pretty impressed by, considering the fact we hadn't even started the show yet. So quite a group here for sure. Todd would like to know, what are some of the coaches that have influenced you in your own style of coaching?
I would say probably the biggest one was when I was a graduate assistant at St. Cloud State. I had an offensive coordinator who was a Christian guy, and that can be a rough atmosphere at times to be a part of a Division II state school, and sometimes things that are said. And so for me to watch him in the fact that he was really competitive, really professional in what he was doing, but yet did it in the right way, for me he's probably the biggest influence on my life. And again, the way he conducted himself at school, the way he conducted himself with his family, and those types of things. He was the person that I watched the most and just said, hey, that's kind of who I want to be when I coach, or why I want to keep coaching. And so him, and then there was a defensive coordinator who I recruited with who also gave the same thing, and more so out of him was how do you coach with intensity? How do you recruit with intensity? How do you go and do things the right way in the world of college football? And so, from those 2 guys, they were probably the 2 biggest influences on me as far as, just who they were as people, number one, and second, how they carried themselves as coaches.
Carl from St. Bonifacius asks, Coach, you're doing a great job, points out, what are some of the ways that you try to equate football into life?
We talk about the fact of at different times you're going to have things that are going well. You're going to have different times where it feels like things are piling up on you. I was just talking to a young man walking down the hall. One of our players got done with class, and he was talking about the different things that are kind of piling up on him. And it's no different when you first get married and you have car problems and you have to figure out a way to pay for that, and then all of a sudden this comes up that you have to pay for. There's different things that now as a college student will equate later on when, again, you're married and you have a family and you have to do things. The problems don't end, they just change where they're at. And so from our standpoint, we try to talk about the fact, and we talked about faith earlier, we talked about the same concept. The more you put into your effort on the football field, whether it's working out, or whether it's watching film, or whether it's in practice, the better you'll get. The same thing in your faith. The more you put into it, as far as spending time in the Word, spending time with peers and working on those things, the better relationship you'll have with Him, and the better that you'll be as far as your faith goes. And try to correlate those things together in the understanding of, what I put into it is usually what I get out of it.
Coach Sather was telling me that it's hard to be a person that is working hard on the football field and then not working hard other places. Is that would be something you would find true?
I think that's a huge part of it as well, is if you choose, we talked about this earlier, if you choose that this is how you want to live your life, you can't pick and choose where I want to work hard here, I want to work hard here. If that's what you want to do, you should do that in every aspect. I don't care whether you're mowing your yard or what you're doing, you should do it right, and you should do it with excellence from that standpoint. And so from our standpoint, that's what we try to do, is we try to instill in them, whatever you're trying to do, make sure you're doing it right. Don't don't lax on this because you don't feel it's important. If it's important enough for you to do, it should be important enough for you to do it right.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us this week, Coach.
Good. Thank you very much.
We want to thank Coach Auer for joining us on Auer Time this week. Once again, if you'd like to pose your own questions to the Crown College coach, please send them to us at johnauer@minorleaguesportsreport.com. That's John Auer at minorleaguesportsreport.com. Please have your questions to us again by Wednesday at noon so we can give the coach a day to review them before we record our show on Thursday. My name is Rob Paneer, and I'm the managing editor of the Minor League Sports Report. I want to thank you for joining us this week, and we look forward to seeing you next week on Auer Time.